Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news, so if you haven't had time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. Stay tuned for our weekly review where we'll give you the scoop on the biggest stories that you may have missed in the last 7 days, right from Tel Aviv. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us. $15 million in Qatari funding was just paid out to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip this weekend in what Palestinian sources said was the first of many installments over the next 6 months. The total Qatari cash flow into the Strip is set to add up to an estimated $90 million, and the funds will supposedly go to civil servants, whom the Palestinian Authority has stopped paying.
Israeli officials hold firm that the Hamas terror organization which rules over the Strip will not take control of the money, but the influx of funds into the coastal enclave are just part of greater negotiations between Israel and Hamas as well. Egypt, the United Nations, Qatar, and several other nations have long been working to facilitate agreements between Israel and the Palestinians. And now it appears as though Qatar has come to save the day. According to Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar, the Arab Gulf nation and Israel have even reached a deal to establish a sea route between Gaza and Cyprus. It's unclear how the sea route would be operated, but any potential route would fall under international supervision, in addition to Israeli monitoring. Meanwhile, as his convoy was surveying the Gaza border protests on Friday, Qatar's ambassador to the Palestinians, Mohammed El Ahmadi's envoy, was pelted with stones. Gaza officials blame the incident on the PFLP, though, which aligns with Abbas's Fatah party against negotiations with Israel. And as for Palestinian Authority President Abbas, the Palestinian leader this weekend vowed to continue payments as well, but to terrorists and their families, not to civil servants. He also explained that it was, quote, a duty upon us all, end quote, to unite under the PLO and conduct a national struggle.
Meanwhile, the evening rocket fire comes after an ongoing operation in the southern Gaza Strip overnight Sunday ended in tragedy, as an IDF officer was killed and another was wounded. The slain soldier has only been identified as Lieutenant Colonel M for now. However, according to the Army, quote, his heroic actions will not be published in the media, but he deserves our salute. His actions led to Israel having superiority over its enemies, end quote.
He was also a father of two. The incident occurred in the Gaza town of Khan Yunis, and Israeli defense officials have stated clearly that despite reports, the operation was not intended to kidnap or assassinate. Rather, the Army claims that the operation was to gather intelligence, but it went haywire halfway through when they were identified and intercepted. That's when a firefight broke out in which Lieutenant Colonel M and at least 7 Palestinians were killed. Allegedly, among the Palestinians killed in the shootout were top Hamas commanders and terrorists as well, however. Senior Hamas officials from the Izz-e-Din al-Qassam brigade said that a special Israeli force infiltrated Khan Yunis in a civilian car, and that once there, quote, the force assassinated the commander of our forces. The withdrawal of the enemy led to the martyrdom of a number of people, end quote. Hamas went on to charge that the alleged target of the incident, however, was Khan Yunis commander Sheikh Nour Barakeh, who supposedly led Hamas's southern terror tunnel program. As for the IDF, the civilian car wasn't the only force that entered the Strip. The military later confirmed that 3 of the 7 Palestinians who were killed in the shootout, and then IAF jets fired at least 20 projectiles at Khan Yunis, killing another 3. The 7th was wounded earlier and died of his injuries. In response, Gaza fired at least 17 missiles at Israel. There were no reports of injuries or damages, and 3 of the projectiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome.
Intense rocket fire from Gaza continued to rain down on southern Israel today after over 400 rockets were fired since last night. In response to the escalation, Israeli airstrikes have returned fire towards Hamas in Gaza, reportedly hitting at least 150 targets in the Strip as of this morning. But both multiple Israeli and Palestinian casualties have already been claimed in what has become the most heated flare-up since the 2014 Gaza war.
Southern Israel is under attack. In the last 24 hours, more than 400 mortars and rockets were shot at Israeli cities and villages with deadly consequences. Hamas is deliberately targeting our civilian population, and this is something that we cannot and will not accept. The IDF will strike in a strong and deadly manner in order to make sure that the message passes across and that Hamas understands that it must stop immediately with those attacks.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the Gaza border communities have been running into shelters, and schools across the south have also, of course, been put on hold, as sirens continued to blare in Ashkelon, Sderot, and Beersheva, among others. Even a runoff mayoral vote had been postponed.
בתוך החלון של הדירה של השכנים וירד עד הקרקע. מזל שהשכנה הייתה לבד בבית והייתה בתוך חדר ממ"ד.
I'm terrified. Me and my daughter, we cried before. A lot of people cried out on the stairs, going downstairs. And there's a lot of babies here. Everybody was evacuated outside, must stay outside. I hope that everything's going to be okay.
And while the Iron Dome missile defense system, which was reinforced with extra batteries last night, has reportedly struck down dozens of Hamas projectiles, most hit open areas. Still, some have landed on homes and other structures. In Ashkelon, which was hit several times since Monday night, a rocket that fell on an apartment building killed one man and injured 8 others, including 2 women who are still in critical condition. The murdered victim, a 48-year-old man found under the debris of the collapsed structure, has now been identified as Mahmoud Abu Azba, a Palestinian native from Khalkhul, just north of Hebron. But at least 50 other civilians in Israel have also been injured since the attack began. The escalation all began overnight Sunday to Monday after a botched Israeli mission in Gaza led to the death of a lieutenant colonel and the injuring of another soldier. 7 Palestinians, including high-ranking Hamas members, were also killed in the clashes, however, leading Hamas to begin retaliation Monday evening. The terror group even posted a video showing the moment a Kornet anti-tank missile launched from Gaza struck an Israeli bus driving along the border. This attack is what really galvanized Israel to action. Thankfully, though, just moments before, the large group of IDF soldiers that had been on the bus had gotten off. Another soldier who was nearby was injured, however, and is in unstable condition, while the bus driver was also hospitalized after suffering a panic attack. But returning to today, the escalation in the south has only now shown signs of slowing, as Hamas finally indicated to Egypt its willingness to return to ceasefire negotiations.
On a related note, following the 2 days of rocket fire in the south, many ministers, Knesset members, and civilians alike are today criticizing the Israeli government's willingness to end hostilities with the terror groups in Gaza. In fact, in protest against what he called a capitulation to terror, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has today resigned from his post.
Speaking to a specially convened press conference, Lieberman said the ceasefire made it so that he could no longer fulfill his role in the cabinet.
כאן על מנת להודיע על התפטרותי מתפקיד שר הביטחון של מדינת ישראל. השאלה נשאלת למה דווקא עכשיו. ומבחינתי מה שקרה אתמול, הפסקת אש אתמול, בשילוב עם כל התהליך ההסדרה מול חמאס, זה כניעה לטרור. מבחינת הסדר ההגיוני, מבחינת אינטרס הביטחוני, היינו חייבים קודם כל לסיים את הסיפור של הדרום. סיפור של הדרום קודם לכל. ואותה רפיסות שגילינו היא כמובן מקרינה גם לזירות האחרות. לא הייתי ממשיך לכהן בתפקידי כשר הביטחון, לא הייתי יכול להסתכל בעיניים של תושבי דרום.
Oddly, though, this resignation doesn't come as a surprise, as Channel 10 actually reported that during the ceasefire talks, Lieberman, Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, Environmental Protection Minister Zev Elkin, and Education Minister Naftali Bennett all proposed an alternative response. But their idea was rejected by other ministers at the meeting, and Lieberman was obviously furious. Well, now, before the dust has even settled, Education Minister Naftali Bennett and several Likud members are already claiming that they are Lieberman's rightful replacement. Threats to leave the coalition have even been made over the appointment, putting Prime Minister Netanyahu in a very tough spot to negotiate, choosing between a defense minister who will toe the party line and a potential early election. Meanwhile, several other politicians have also taken the opportunity to slam Netanyahu for a supposedly lax response to Hamas. Zionist Union Chairman Avi Gabay and Yesh Atid head Yair Lapid both criticized the Prime Minister for, quote, failing to restore calm and for not having a long-term plan to deal with the threats in the south. And during an Army radio interview, even the father of late IDF soldier Hadar Golden, whose body is still being held by Hamas in Gaza, said that, quote, the Prime Minister has turned us into a country of suckers, and in the Middle East, it's very dangerous to be a sucker. He added that the Prime Minister is knowingly endangering IDF soldiers and civilians because Hamas has not paid anything for its behavior in abducting a soldier. If they had signed a ceasefire agreement and demanded and received the soldiers, which the Prime Minister promised, the picture would have looked very different. We would not look like suckers, but the situation is getting worse from week to week, end quote.
Returning now to Israel's south, 41-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Mem was laid to rest yesterday, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. But Lieutenant Colonel Mem wasn't the only victim of Hamas's indiscriminate attacks. A Palestinian husband and father of 6 from Khalkhul, just north of Hebron in the West Bank, was also killed in Ashkelon when a rocket landed on the apartment building that he was in. He was identified later as 48-year-old building contractor Mahmoud Abu Azba, and 8 others were also injured in that same shelling, 2 critically. In fact, at least 50 other civilians in Israel were also wounded and or hospitalized by the 2 days of Hamas rocket and mortar fire. That's why, despite the shaky ceasefire appearing to hold, many Israeli citizens are siding with the now former defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman.
Many Israelis, especially residents of the southern Gaza border communities, are today demanding that the government do more to end the threat from Hamas. Right after information of a ceasefire was released, protesters in the south headed to the streets to burn tires and block roads to express their frustration with the government. Demonstrators chanted that they don't want to live a life under terror anymore. They intend to protest and block streets in Tel Aviv today as well. Rather than wait through a ceasefire they have no hope in, southern Israelis like Reut Basis from Sderot say, quote, "It's better to suffer in the safe rooms and once and for all put an end to all of this," end quote. Because she knows that, quote, "A month from now it will be the same thing again. Another few days and again there will be missiles and nothing will have changed. It's unreasonable that this is how our lives look," end quote. Miri, another resident from Sderot, similarly stated that she thinks Israel is shooting itself in the foot, explaining that, quote, "We have been at war for 17 years. Our children are soldiers, they have PTSD. We are no longer willing to let them fool us. We do not believe neither in the government nor its leader."
כולם היו רוצים הפסקת אש, אבל רוצים להחזיר את כוח ההרתעה לצה"ל. נמאס לנו שכל חודש יש לנו פה עוד טרור ועוד קסאמים ועוד הפוגה. כנראה שהממשלה שלנו איבדה את כוח ההרתעה. כנראה שהם לא מבינים מה קורה.
Now, as previously reported, the sole civilian fatality in 2 days of rockets fired from Gaza was Mahmoud Abu Asabeh, a 48-year-old contractor who spent much of his time in Israel, and he was originally from a small town near Hebron, where his family and his friends gathered yesterday to lay him to rest.
Family members and locals from his town of Khalkhul brought Abu Asabeh's body to the Nabi Yunis Mosque, where they performed traditional prayers and then buried Abu Asabeh in a nearby cemetery beside his grandfather. Traditional keffiyeh, or Middle Eastern scarves, were also laid on his remains. Nihal Abu Asabeh, Mahmoud's mother, immediately broke down into tears and fell to the ground when she saw her son's body before her. But surprisingly, there were no senior Fatah or Palestinian Authority officials that attended the burial service. In contrast, a month ago, at a funeral for a Palestinian who was allegedly killed by settlers in the West Bank, many high-level Fatah and PA officials were present to represent their faction's support. But Abu Asabeh worked in Israel for the past 15 years, entering the country from Khalkhul to work on Sunday and returning home to the West Bank every Friday. So it seems the Palestinian faction simply couldn't or didn't want to support the Asabeh family, as they do for terrorists and other Palestinians killed in the conflict. Israel's Jewish Agency, on the other hand, is planning to send support to Abu Asabeh's family from its Fund for the Victims of Terror. Mahmoud left behind a wife, 2 daughters, and 3 sons.
As of now, it's been a century since the end of World War I, and Prime Minister Netanyahu gathered in Paris along with over 70 other world leaders to mark the centennial. His visit was cut short, however, due to intense clashes that broke out between Israeli forces and Palestinian fighters in the Gaza Strip last night.
But before departing, Netanyahu commented that hundreds of thousands of Jewish fighters were involved in World War I, and that the war marked a turning point for Jews to defend themselves, paving the way for Zionism to flourish. Netanyahu also attended a ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe, as well as a luncheon with international leaders. And although France discouraged side talks during the event, Netanyahu managed to have a, quote, good and businesslike conversation with Russian President Putin. This was the first meeting between the two since the downing of a Russian spy plane in Syria during a September Israeli air raid. Reports up until the meeting were that Putin had canceled it in an apparent snub over Netanyahu, but thankfully that talk has just been put to rest. Netanyahu was also seen with United States President Donald Trump and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and he added that many African leaders also came up to him about the importance of the cooperation with Israel and ways Israel could help their countries. Meanwhile, France is now holding a 3-day international peace forum that will end on Tuesday and aims to highlight the importance of the global community at a time when people are questioning the necessity of international institutions. But while the international peace forum was going on, southern Israel was far from peaceful. After the clashes broke out between Israeli commandos and Hamas fighters in Gaza Sunday night, Netanyahu cut his trip short and headed back to Israel. Until Prime Minister Netanyahu was scheduled to arrive, Defense Minister Lieberman was left in charge of convening the security cabinet of top ministers. There are no statements from the meeting just yet.
All right, the wildfire that took over the town of Paradise in Northern California became the deadliest wildfire in the state's modern history on Monday, when officials reported that they discovered the remains of 13 more people. This brings the death toll in California's blazes to 42, but that's not all. Nature doesn't play favorites, and many Jewish institutions have also now been burnt to the ground.
One of the many stories is that of Rabbi Barry Diamonds, who is the rabbi of one of the affected synagogues. As soon as Rabbi Diamond got news about the fire, he went straight to the synagogue, where he saw that sparks were already flying on the temple property as houses were burning across the street. Diamond then ran to the back door and grabbed the Torahs and other holy books from the central ark, but as stated earlier, this is just one of a few devastatingly similar stories. Thankfully, many organizations have already taken up the charge of aiding the affected communities, though. There's been a warm embrace from various organizations and Hillel houses on university campuses that are helping one another out. And the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles has also been providing tremendous support to temples as well as other congregations, day schools, and Jewish camps that have all been impacted in the destruction. Then in the coming days, counseling and food banks are also anticipated to be provided as well. Between the campfire and Woolsey fires, at least 228 people are still missing, in addition to the 42 who have already been confirmed killed. Nearly 8,000 structures have also been destroyed, displacing roughly 200,000 people in the Southern California area.
Regardless of politics or personal feelings, the IDF Judea and Samaria medical unit saves lives every single day. Israeli or Palestinian, they don't care, and they're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And although it may be hard, IDF Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Ido Dachman says it's very, quote, fulfilling. Dachman is based at the headquarters of the IDF's Judea and Samaria division, where he oversees 100 personnel, and the team is responsible for all emergency medical services in the 3,000 square kilometer region. The IDF crew responds to an average of 3 calls per day, coordinating with the Israeli Magen David Adom and Palestinian Red Crescent health services. And they get called to all manner of crises, from a Jewish woman in labor with complications to a Palestinian Muslim cancer patient requiring transport to an Israeli facility for treatment. The number one casualty, though, is car accidents. Dachman mentioned that there are a few spikes in the accident incidents every year, quote, especially during Ramadan, the Islamic holy month when Muslims fast from sunrise to sundown. Dachman explained that, quote, this is because the observant do not eat or drive during the day, but at night they start their lives and some drive very recklessly, I'm sorry to say, end quote. But he also said that when there is an accident, no one asks questions or points blame. Rather, they're there to ensure that the wounded receive the best possible care, no matter who it is. This year, some 2,000 people, about half of them Palestinian, have been treated by the Israel's Army West Bank unit. In other high-tech news, Israeli scientists have now announced that they've discovered a way to engineer tissue implants using a patient's own cells. That's not all. Tel Aviv researchers say that their fully personalized tissue implant could pave the way towards developing any kind of tissue implants from just one small fatty tissue biopsy.
The research was revealed in a university statement after its publication in the scientific journal Advanced Materials. And according to the research, the new tissue implants will be engineered from the patient's own biomaterial cells. As a result, scientists say that this development will greatly reduce the risk of a negative immune response to an organ transplant. The current method for tissue engineering is where cells are isolated from the patient and cultured in biomaterials, synthetic or natural, which are typically derived from plants or animals and assembled into functional tissue structures. But after the transplant, it can still lead to an immune response that can ultimately reject the implanted tissue. And just to deal with this risk, patients who are recipients of these engineered tissues are often treated with immunosuppressants, which can endanger the patient's health. So this breakthrough will greatly reduce this risk as well. Finally, as if this wasn't enough, at a later stage, the researchers are planning to regenerate organs, including intestines and eyes, again using the patient's own materials and cells as a base.
Now, even though Jews make up only 2% of the population in the United States, anti-Semitic attacks accounted for 58% of all religion-based hate crimes in 2017. And as if that wasn't enough, the FBI says that hate crimes against Jews in the United States rose by 37% since last year alone. Just last week, nearly an entire class of middle school-aged boys, save for one teen, performed a Nazi salute in their junior prom photo. A statement posted to social media by Jordan Blue, the only kid who did not salute in the photo, said, quote, I truly and firmly believe we need to make a change to this horrible act. It needs to stop. The bullying, immaturity, and just taking things as a joke, end quote. Local Wisconsin authorities are currently investigating the incident. But then in another photographic faux pas, stock photo company Shutterstock came under fire this week after it was brought to their attention that a series of their published shots were anti-Semitic. though it's hard to understand how the shots slipped through the cracks, as they depict a very apparent Jewish man in a yarmulke holding wads of cash. The photos have since been removed. As we know, however, unfortunately, anti-Semitism doesn't stop in the United States either. A British couple with neo-Nazi views have now been convicted of membership in an outlawed group after naming their son Hitler. During their trial, pictures of the parents holding their baby while wearing white robes of the KKK and holding a flag with a swastika was shown. And all this just after the shooting in a synagogue in Pittsburgh during Saturday morning prayer services left 11 worshippers dead. In response to the rising trend, security is continuing to be heightened near Jewish areas in Europe as well as in America, from Brooklyn to Las Vegas to the University of Massachusetts, where neo-Nazi stickers were found on campus just last Wednesday. And now for ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh with the top 5 of the week.
Israelis are recognized leaders in a variety of different fields, from high-tech to innovations all the way to humanitarian aid. So today, I'll be giving you ILTV's top 5 list of influential Israelis in their fields. First on the list are the techies. Amnon Shashua and Ziv Aviram are the co-founders of the Israeli sensor technology company Mobileye. The company was acquired by Intel for $15 billion, which has been reported to be the largest deal ever in Israel high-tech. This not only changed the founders' life, which was beyond their wildest dreams, but has also changed the way we drive and so much more. Second on the list is the game changer, Sivan Yaari. Sivan is the founder of Innovation Africa, which is a nonprofit organization that brings Israeli solar power, water, and agricultural innovations right to the rural African villages. A video was released titled "The Israeli Heart and Mind Just Transformed the Lives of 1 Million Africans Forever." So, if you're looking for the full story or maybe looking to help out, make sure to check out their website. Third up is the entrepreneur Adam Newman, the co-founder of the most talked about startup in the world, WeWork. This international co-working space company is said to be the most valuable startup in New York City, according to Business Insider. And Newman credits Israel as being special and filled with energy. So hey, I guess we're doing something right now. Fourth on the list is entertainment. And what could we possibly be referring to other than the one and only Israeli Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot? Gadot exploded onto our screens with the movie Wonder Woman and became the 6th most searched person on Google, along with being the top grossing female star of 2017. GQ named her Wonder Woman of the Year last year, and Gadot has since been on almost every notable talk show around, except for mine. There's no way around it. She absolutely changed the game for all aspiring Israeli actors. Last but never least is sports. Omri Caspi, who has been repping Israel for quite some time now, the 29-year-old has made a huge impact playing for the Golden State Warriors NBA team and has been on 6 teams in the last 9 years. He may not be the most famous basketball player around, but he sure is for us Israelis. Caspi reps his lucky number 18, which is also a symbol for chai, or life in Hebrew, so it's safe to say he's inspiring Israeli athletes all over the country. That's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
All right, that's it for this week's weekly review. Remember to follow us on Facebook for more news at Israel English News, and of course on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.